Hello, everyone. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. Happy Thursday and happy Pride. Today is the first day, so we're happy that you are here. My name is Jamie Henkel. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Learning Inclusion Manager at PFLAG National. And I'll be with you if you have any comments that you'd like to share on whatever platform you've joined us from. But just like every week, I'm going to bring in Jean Marie Nevada to host today's conversation. Hi, Jean Marie. Happy Pride.
Hey, Henkel, as you were doing the introduction, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking I should have worn something rainbow instead of black and white stripes, but happy Pride in spite of my clothing malfunction, clearly, that I'm having.
Yeah, well, you've got that Puerto Rican flag behind you, so I'm feeling good about that.
I do. Oh my gosh, and I actually pointed to it with the right hand rather than pointing in the opposite. I'm really winning today. It must be Pride Month.
All right, well, I will maybe see you later, but take it away.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. My pronouns are she and her, or ella if you use Spanish. And I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. Every single week, we get to talk together to talk about something related to LGBTQ inclusion, equality, about the community, and certainly about Pride. And this week is absolutely no exception. We have got a great conversation for you. So for those of you who like to read the articles that we share in advance, you can grab this week's article at straightforequality.org/STTA live. It was an article from the Washington Post. It's actually a couple of years old, which I think makes for an interesting piece of this conversation. And it was about the importance of social media when it comes to LGBTQ kids being seen, but just in general when it comes to LGBTQ visibility. We've got some incredible guests today, and I want to get right into the conversation because we have so much to say about this. So with that, I would like to bring in Dana Rudolph and Jackson Alder. Hello, my friend. It is so good to see both of your faces, and thank you for joining us on our first show of Pride Month, which is always kind of some of our favorite shows. And I want to get right into this conversation. So, Dana, you were so very, very well known for your Mombian blog, but could you tell us a little bit about your background as it relates to sort of building online community for the LGBTQ community for people who maybe haven't met you before?
Sure. I'm a lesbian mom, and my spouse, Helen, and I just celebrated our 30th anniversary. And we have a kid in college. So I've done the whole mom cycle, although it doesn't end in college. I'll note that. And my professional background is in online strategy, marketing, and content. And that was actually something I did starting back in the first .com boom in the mid-90s. So I've been doing it for a while. I took a break when I left outside employment to stay home with my son. But I wanted to keep my skills up, and I started a blog, and here we are.
Yeah. Many years later, and congratulations on that. That is all incredibly impressive. Jackson, our senior digital strategist at PFLAG, tell us a little bit for people who haven't had a chance to meet you, because you've done the show with me before, about your background and sort of what brings you into this specific to online community.
Absolutely. I grew up pretty much when the internet was starting to take off, and I've been a moderator of online communities since I was a teen. Most recently, I moderated an online community of about 8,000 members called LGBTQ in Tech, and I was originally hired here at PFLAG to be the senior online community coordinator and launched our first online community on Facebook.
Fantastic. So, Dana, I want to start with you. So could you tell us a little bit more about Mombian? Your blog has won so many awards. You launched it in 2005. There aren't a whole lot of blogs that are still successful that started back there, and yet you are still going strong. So could you give people a little bit about why you started it and some of the contours of how this conversation has changed for you?
Sure. Well, I started it when my son was 2. And I was looking for a way to keep up my professional skills. As I said, this had been my background. But at the time, all of the LGBTQ sites didn't really cover parenting. All of the parenting sites didn't really have anything for LGBTQ families. And I wanted a site that would offer news and information and insight that looked at LGBTQ parenting, but also at other aspects of LGBTQ culture with a parent's eye. And blogging seemed the way to go. It was a rising technology, and I guess I've just been stubborn enough to keep doing it ever since.
I like to be stubborn enough. I also appreciate that. I think it really speaks to how so much of this happens is that it becomes very much of a DIY effort, that something is missing and we have these opportunities to fill those gaps. And you certainly did, and then sort of expanded it. So Jackson, as somebody who is an expert in digital communications, could you add some significance to blogs like Mombian that have lasted so long and why they're so important in terms of engaging people?
Absolutely. I think digital spaces have become so kind of ingrained in everyday lives for so many people. And for some, Googling is the first step to learning about a topic, or going online and finding more information. And I think the internet brought a way for people to easily find that information, and that is likely why Mombian has been going strong since 2005. It's accessible for folks who maybe don't have local resources, maybe don't have folks locally that they can talk to, but they can hop on a computer and find the information and find community.
Yeah.
Thanks. And actually, I'll just jump in to note that the blog has evolved over the years, and I think that's also perhaps a reason for its longevity. For example, a couple of years back, I launched a database of LGBTQ family books, so people can search and find books. This was a question I see several times a week online in various online forums: is where can I find books on, trans girls or same-sex parents who are having a new kid, or whatever the topic may be. People are looking for resources, whether it's kids' books or books for parents. And so now the database has over 12,000 entries in it. And it's, I actually know, there's a number of PFLAG groups around the country who repost when I push out on social media that I've got new books in it. So I hope it's a really good resource. And, when I started the blog, there were maybe 5 books a year that fit, 5 kids books a year that fit this. And now there are literally hundreds. It's been such a tremendous increase since about 2017. So that's been a change that I've seen over the 18 years I've been doing this. But I'm trying to keep up and provide resources that are useful and relevant.
I'm actually so glad that you mentioned the books, because getting ready for the show, of course, I was poking around the website to make sure that I saw everything that was up there. And I just last night was clicking through some of the books, and I was looking and sort of ticking off the ones that I had read, because just like you, one of the things that we hear the most, especially when we're teaching, is what books should I be using and what's age appropriate. And I feel like the collection that you have is unbelievable. Like it's real. There's so much in there. And I have my only little reading list now because of your website. So
thank you. Excellent.
Yeah. So you're not just doing the blog, even though we're going to talk a little bit more about that digital community space. But you've also helped create important commemorations. So June 1st is LGBTQ Families Day, which you founded in 2006. Yay! And PFLAG is a very proud sponsor of the event, along with our friends at Family Equality, Single A and Double A GLAAD, and Collage. Why did you start the program? Because when I think about 2006 and I try to remember what life looked like back then, it was so different than where we are right now. So tell us a little bit sort of what the genesis was. And then Jackson, I want to talk to you about like PFLAG's engagement in it too.
Sure. Well, I launched it in 2006 as Blogging for LGBTQ Families Day. It's at heart an event to celebrate all families with LGBTQ people in them. And I chose it to be at the start of June, not only because it's the start of Pride Month, and what better way to kick off Pride Month, but also because it sits almost halfway between Mother's Day and Father's Day. So it reminds us, it kind of honors both, but it reminds us that not all families fit that structure. And, it began as an event for bloggers to come together as a community to share our stories, but also to push those stories out to the wider world. And as social media evolved, it became a broader social media event. And it's even starting to creep out offline into people's observances. For example, 2 years ago, when Connecticut passed its LGBTQ Affirming Parentage Act, they were doing this signing in front of the state capitol. And one of the lawyers at GLAAD, who had helped push the legislation through, was there on camera at the signing and saying how appropriate it was that the signing was on LGBTQ Families Day.
Oh.
So that was really wonderful. And last year, we even had people like Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, and Deb Haaland, all posting about the event. And while it's not just about the celebrities, it's great to see that it's catching their eye as well. But I really hope that every LGBTQ family, however you define that, takes part. And you can do so by posting or sharing something about your own family or just a message of support. You don't have to violate your privacy. And I also have some general graphics for the event on my website that you can find the link right on the front page, and you can use those if you like. But it would just be great to see a show of support across social media. And if you have ways of celebrating in your community as well, by all means, talk to your local library and see if they'll emphasize some family books on that day or something. And then talk about it on social media so that we know you've done it, which would be lovely.
Start on social, go into real life, return to social when it's over. It's our new cycle now. But what an honor, and how exciting that must have been to actually sort of hear this kind of recognition. Jackson, as you look at events like this, is this something that you're seeing more in this digital space, this evolution from starting on social to sometimes becoming an actual event, and then people sort of amplifying on social? Is this something you're seeing more of, especially as we kind of go back to some in person?
I am. Yes. So that's a good point of, I am seeing that happen, especially because with the pandemic, things shut down and kind of went to mainly digital. So I am seeing it kind of return to in-person events that maybe were only online or started online are now in-person big kind of festivals or days of celebration.
And I think it's kind of nice that we can maintain these two spaces. I was actually just working on something the other day, and one of the things I started thinking about was there were no upsides of the pandemic, let's just face it. But one of the interesting developments was that so many people who never felt like they had access to events and to connections, suddenly we were all online. And it became kind of this great digital equalizer. And I think that just is it. I'm hoping that we maintain a lot of those connections, because it is a privilege to have in-person community. And I think it's why sites like this are so important. But I also want to kind of talk about the significance of sites like Mombian and the sites of the fact that we have so many digital community spaces, especially for LGBTQ young people. So just a couple of weeks ago, Trevor Project released some new polling data about LGBTQ youth and mental health and their experiences. One of the questions that they actually asked was, where do you feel most affirmed? And they gave young people the option of in my home, at school, online. And interestingly enough, the place that came out with the top number of responses was in online communities. Jackson, first, why do you think this is the case? And second, I want to also talk about, did it surprise you at all, given how much we also talk about the level of harassment that often LGBTQ young people face while they're online?
I think this is the case because for many LGBTQ plus youth, family or school may not be a supportive or safe space, especially in the climate that we're in right now and possibly where they live. And it really doesn't surprise me, partly because of my own history. And when I came out, online was a safe space. And while there is a high level of online harassment that LGBTQ plus people, not just youth, but all LGBTQ plus people face online in general forums like on Twitter or on Facebook, there are communities that are moderated to be as safe as they can be. And that provides a place for them to be seen, accepted, to make friends, to find connections, and talk with other folks that are going through similar experiences.
Yeah, and I think that interesting tension. We're constantly there. You know, we've done lots of shows talking about these online spaces and how important they are, but also how important it is that we are doing everything we can to make them much safer. Dana, have you seen from the people that you are interacting with, are people getting a little bit more concerned about the safety issue these days, especially in the digital space? Are you hearing any of that?
I mean, I think there's certainly nastiness out there, and people are aware of it. And in kind of general online forums, there's certainly that. But as Jackson was saying, and I think they're right, you know, there are these private spaces that are more secure and affirming. You know, there was a slightly older GLSEN study that showed that LGBTQ youth spend 45 minutes more on average than non-LGBTQ youth online. And I think it's for all the reasons that Jackson said. And I think even if they're affirmed by their families, if they don't have other people in their community who identify the way they do, they may seek it. You know, even if there are gay and lesbian kids at their school, maybe there's not a trans kid or vice versa. So it's great to have these online outlets. And I think partly also it's a generational thing. You know, my son interacts online with his friends far more. I mean, I never had the option when I was a kid because I'm that old, but I mean, even he was in high school his last 2 years during the end of the pandemic. Oh. And when he got into college in the spring of his senior year of high school, he was already on an online forum with the people in his rising college class that spring and connecting with them and interacting. And so when he landed on campus, he knew people and he figured out what dorm he wanted to be in. It's a different way of interacting. And I'm kind of odd because I am old, but I also started in the online space back when it was really beginning. So I'd like to think I'm a little cooler with it than some people, but maybe my son would tell me differently. But I think we parents have to kind of fight that reaction of screen time is bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. You know.
Yeah, sometimes it's not. Jackson, because, as Dana's saying these things, Dana, I suspect that you and I are probably of a very similar generation because my experiences sound a little bit more like yours than Jackson's do. And I'm just going to say that we are more seasoned. I'm not even saying old at this stage in the game.
I like that.
We're aging like fine wines, if we must. Jackson, I often think about this. We spend so much time as alleged grown-ups talking about safety online, especially for queer youth. Do you get the sense working in these spaces that youth are very well aware of this and probably a little bit more savvy to it than sometimes we give them credit for? I kind of wonder about this.
I do. I think that especially LGBTQ plus folks are kind of at a heightened sense of awareness of what might be not safe, what might be kind of like, oh, let's stay away from there. I think that we don't give youth the credit sometimes that they deserve of like, they trust them, they'll know and and make good decisions for themselves most of the time.
Yeah, I kind of teeter between these two places because everything seems very scary when you read about some of the things that are going on in those spaces and that there actually is a direct connection to mental health harm and even worse than that in some cases. And yet I think the kids actually are all right. I think they're very well aware about what's there and what's healthy and what's not. Dana, you're spending a lot of time talking to families, especially talking to parents too, who are queer identified. As the world gets a little bit more hostile outside, are you seeing, because, you mentioned that, people are looking for certain things. Are you hearing different things from parents, what they feel like they need? Are you hearing about their concerns? Are they asking questions about what is happening, let's say, politically and how it's going to affect their families? What are those conversations looking like these days?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly hearing from parents in places like Florida, where the anti-LGBTQ laws are horrendous. And there are people who are considering moving if they haven't moved already. And I know the same is true for parents of trans and other LGBTQ kids in states like Texas and others as well. So there's certainly that. I think there's also perhaps a caution about putting up too many family photos online. Having said that, there are other parents who just push stuff out there about their families. I would just say, think it through beforehand and make a decision that feels right for you and your kids, especially as your kids get older. But I also think there's a growing need for developing online community. I don't think people are fleeing the online space because of it. I think if they're being disconnected from their geographic locations, like the parents in Florida who may be moving, they will come to rely even more on the online space to stay in touch with the people they liked back in Florida and to make connections in their new spaces.
It's really heartbreaking. We talk about these things, we talk about the policy issues, we talk about the laws, but there really is an impact. And we are seeing people leave certain states and people concerned about, am I even going to be able to survive safely in this state? There's already data on people leaving Florida that we've started to see come out. And this is very real. And I think to the point that you're making, I think in some cases it will be driving people into digital spaces to maintain some of those connections, and for people who can't leave, because being able to leave is an enormous privilege. I think spaces that the two of you are creating become even more important. So, there are great events like LGBTQ Family Day, PFLAG has Parent Day, which is on July 23rd. They seem to me at this point to be more important than ever to the community. We sort of would have hoped that things would have looked different at this stage in the game, but they don't. So what we do is start fighting. Jackson, are there barriers that people need to get past to find some of these positive places, these positive spaces online? And with so much negativity out there, what do those barriers look like? And how do you sort of coach people past them?
Sure. I think the most basic barrier is that for some folks, especially in rural areas, they may not have reliable internet access.
Yes.
And that, at the most basic, that makes it really hard to get to these spaces. I think there are also barriers, like lots of these communities are closed and private because of the climate that we're in, and to be able to make them as safe as we can. And so having to answer questions to gain entrance may turn some folks off. But I think that those questions help us vet folks who want to join, help us make sure that the folks that are entering are not gonna, cause harm to the folks that are in the community. And so, I think lots of those spaces exist, and they exist for a variety of demographics and for needs, and whether it's for families or for LGBTQ plus youth, and they're important, and to kind of go through those questions and answer them honestly, and that will help you get that entrance or find the community that you're looking for.
Thank you for mentioning that. It's fascinating that you say that, because I've noticed I don't spend a lot of time on social media for my own mental health, but I've noticed that different groups that I have wanted to join recently, more and more I'm seeing sort of those screening questionnaires before I am granted access to them, and it can be a little jarring. There have been moments where I thought, oh, I don't even know you yet, and you're asking that. Not offensive questions, but they feel a little personal. I've also noticed a lot of sites that are saying, by joining this community, you are agreeing to, you will not do this, and I think those are healthy. But thank you for framing that as a barrier, but also adding context. And I think it's important people hear why that's happening. Dana, in these spaces, we talk a lot, and I don't mean to focus on the negative, how people are fearing, how people are worried about protecting their families. Are you seeing more posts and more people talking about joy and the joy that they are finding in their families, and this tension between what's happening politically and the fact that we also at the same time sometimes see a lot more acceptance in many places?
I think there's always been joy. I think from the first wave of LGBTQ bloggers who were joyously sharing photos of their families and telling stories of both the good parts and the hardships, there's always been joy. And I think events like LGBTQ Families Day are kind of a time to focus that and uplift it at a particular point in time. But it's really a year-round thing, and I've never seen the lack of that. And I think in some ways, social media gives us even more ways to share that. And that's a wonderful thing about it, because the media very often likes to focus on the negative.
Yeah.
And if that's all one sees, that's all one's going to think. And, one of the things I say when I review the many LGBTQ inclusive kids books that I do is that not every one of them needs to be a story of trauma.
Yeah.
It was kind of a first generation of early books that always focused on someone having a problem with the kid with two moms, or and there was a time and a place for those, and I think there still is, because people do still have problems, but those aren't our only stories. And it's really been good these past few years to see more stories about the joys and about LGBTQ families, where the story isn't about them being an LGBTQ family necessarily. So I think if that's any indication, yes, there is certainly still joy, and perhaps even a rise of it in the face of all of the hardships.
I love that. I've noticed I'm a huge reader. I'm constantly a book in my hands. And I've noticed more and more books that I'm reading, LGBTQ is a part of the story. It is a part of who characters are. It is not the center of the story. It is not entirely based on trauma. I mean, I remember as a teenager, like everything was about everything's going to be bad. It's going to be so hard for you. And now it's a part of your identity. It's a part of the story, and it's done so seamlessly. And I think so many times it is a source of joy. And I think that's very exciting. So we like to round out every single show that we do with leaving people who are watching this program with something to do, because PFlaggers love stuff to do with who we are. So Jackson, I'll start with you, and Dana, we will wrap up with you. How do you think our allies out there, name a couple of ways that allies can ensure that online communities are safe for LGBTQ people? Because, it's always nice to have somebody helping out, but it's not always our job.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And if allies are not in an online community, join our PFlag online community. We would love to have you. Listen to folks in the LGBTQ community if they say, hey, this isn't quite right. Open to feedback. And if you see something that looks harmful, speak up and stand up for your LGBTQ plus loved ones and friends and family.
I love that. Just join, be there. Dana, what advice do you have for allies who want to create safer spaces for us?
Well, let's see. I think what Jackson said about people speaking up if they see something online is absolutely necessary. I also think it's important just to model inclusivity in the language you use. Don't introduce a comment in your forum by, hey, ladies and gentlemen, say, hey, people, or something more inclusive. Include your pronouns in your own online profiles. As we've done here for this video, just make that a habit, and try to be aware, if you set up online polls or something, the options that you have, make sure those are inclusive of all family configurations and gender identities and everything else. So just try to create a good environment before nasty comments occur, and maybe even as a preventative, to show that that's the kind of place this is.
I love that. I was just at an event and somebody said, inclusion doesn't have to be difficult. And I think that what you both just said is exactly to that point. There are proactive things that you can do that don't take the heavy lift, that have this enormous heavy impact for people. Dana, it was really an honor to meet you and to get to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. Jackson, my friend, as always, I enjoy getting to talk to you and have you here. Thank you both for what you're doing to create these spaces. It means a lot to a lot of people. It's a lifesaver for a lot of people. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We will talk to you.
It was great to be here.
Thank you. Well, that wraps up our show once again. We will be back next week with another great Pride Month show. Please make sure that you are checking out PFLAG's online community. Make sure that you are checking out Mombi. And if you've never been there, check out that book list. There's some really good suggestions in there that I've added to my reading list. We will see you again next week. If you need any help between now and then, make sure you check us out at pflag.org. And we will wrap up the way we do every single show, reminding you to do 3 things: run fast, laugh hard, and most of all, please be kind. We'll see you next week on Something